Hello everyone! Now this video isn't what you think it would be. There are tons of videos about Sonic 06 and its development cycle that led it to be one of the most infamous games of all time, but this video is more of a theory around the game. So recently I've been thinking about the Metarex Saga, the third season of Sonic X. It's my favorite arc in the show, but I'm not here to talk about that. In my time on the internet, I have seen people discuss what if the Metarex Saga was a video game instead. However, with further thinking, I came up with a theory. What if the Metarex Saga was planned to be a video game and that game was Sonic 06? It's a theory that I think would be fun to discuss, so without further ado, let's begin. The Metarex Saga is the most game story in Sonic X. Now the thing about Sonic S is that it's a compilation of adaptations of Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 with a loose adaptation of Sonic Battle. Now, the thing about these adaptations is that they are very small and condensed versions of their respective games. As a result, these adaptations will usually fall under criticism that they are not as strong as the source material because they had to skim through the games. Ironically, the Metarex Saga, on the other hand, feels the most complete game storyline because having an entire season being dedicated to tell a story, but also having elements from the video game. The first thing is that Sonic gets shoe upgrades in the season, reminiscent of the shoe upgrades in the adventure games. He even has the soap shoes in this arc. Also, how this season would flip perspectives from different teams like Team Hero, Team Dark, and Chaotix is like the different character stories in the adventure games. The final battle of this arc is against Final Mova, who pretty much fits the criteria that a 3D Sonic game needs an Edric monster as a final boss. There's a lot of things that make this season of the show a supposed rough draft for a mainline 3D Sonic game. I wonder why that is. Let's look at that timeline between 2003 and 2005 where Sonic 06 was revealed at E3 that year. During that time period, that's when Sonic S was still on the air and Sonic Heroes was near completion for a late 2003 release in Japan and an early 2004 release internationally. We need to talk about the creative process of Sonic S, where Sonic Team was heavily involved with. Yeah, out of all the Sonic shows we've gotten over the years, X is the only one where they had the most involvement in. Anyways, early 2004 saw the end of season 2 of the show, which was actually the supposed ending of the show. More on that later. By 2004, the series was only 2 years away from the 15th anniversary of the franchise. Now, Shadow the Hedgehog obviously started development, but plans for the next mainline game and what it could be had to start around this point, right? Let's be honest, Heroes almost killed Takashi Iizuka, so it would be great to at least have a head start on the next major game already. This is where I believe Sonic Team started conceptualizing story concepts for the next game, and one of those concepts had to be the Metarex Saga. I feel like Sonic Team were just tossing numerous story ideas for the Metarex potentially being the most developed concept, like the villains, the idea of it being a space adventure, and the character of Cosmo before they were finalized. If anything, a rough draft of the story arc at the very least. Now, this is where the direction changes. Going back to Sonic X, episode 52 was the planned final episode of the series until Sega commissioned for another season of the show due to the popularity of it in international territories. Since X pretty much was greenlit for another 26 episodes, Sonic Team will also have to come up with the concept of another storyline for the show since they were involved in the show. Logically, why not have the concept about that was possibly more developed at that point than say a Princess in the Flame Disaster story be used for the show and have it be finalized there just to save time for the anniversary game. It also makes an argument why Season 3 didn't adapt Heroes or Advance 3 with new Slice of Life episodes because the nature of the adaptations on S, like the two adventure games, were small. That wouldn't fill the 26 episode slot that Sonic Team would need to fill for the show. Plus that it would take more time to come up with individual smaller stories like the previous seasons. My point is that since Sonic Team were involved in the show where they even look at individual scripts of an episode and are involved in the creative process, is it really far-fetched to believe that any draft of the Metarex Saga predates Sonic X being greenlit for a third season? Since the Metarex Saga has been repurposed for the show, Sonic Team greenlit the story that will eventually be finalized as the Flames of Disaster storyline for the anniversary game. The fact that Kyoko Yoshimura, one of the writers of Sonic 06 and the sole writer of Sonic Unleashed, was the main writer for the Metarex Saga says a lot, don't you think? I also think that Sonic Team wanted to make a space-themed game around this time. Sonic is no stranger to outer space, but after just having space as the final levels for so many years at this point, wouldn't Sonic Team have plans for a game that would take place entirely in space by then? You can say that Shadow Fighting Aliens in his own game was supposed to be some of a sister game to essentially Sonic Adventure in Space. Just a thought. So those are my key points in my theory of how the Metarex Saga could have been the fundamentals of Sonic 06. Let's talk about how the storyline would have worked as a game in place of the 06 we got. Like if Season 3 never happened and the Metarex storyline was made as a driving force for the 15th anniversary game, that would be Sonic 06. So if the Metarex Saga was selected instead, what would be the title? I think Sonic Adventure 3, yes, stereotypically speaking, could have been the title of the game. They didn't make Adventure 3 at the time because Iizuka felt like that would have only appealed to core Sonic fans at the time, and not newcomers, which is why we got Heroes instead. However, even with the financial success of Heroes, Sonic Adventure 2 is the more iconic and culturally significant 3D Sonic game out of the two, even back in the early 2000s. So making the next game another adventure game after essentially having a 2-game break from the duology would make sense. I doubt they would call it Sonic the Hedgehog because that doesn't advertise the game take place in space. That title was selected due to 06 essentially being a return to form for the 3D games, and it was supposed to be the Sonic game of that generation. Alternatively, Sonic Cosmos would be fitting too, not only because it referenced that it takes place in space more than Adventure 3, but references the character of Cosmo. Either Sonic Adventure 3 or Sonic Cosmos could have been the title of this game. So I think if the production of the Metarex game started immediately in 2004 after Heroes, Sonic Team was still aiming for the game to be a late 6th generation game where it releases on the GameCube, Xbox, and the PS2. This is because Sonic Team are so comfortable with optimizing for the systems at this point and want to push these systems to their limits before going over to the next generation consoles. Although Sega forces them to make it exclusive for the 7th generation hardware. However, I don't think Sonic Team will go with the hyper-realistic art style like we got in this timeline. I feel like since this game was a space adventure, Sonic Team will try to evolve the style they had with Heroes and Shadow. Ironically, something that's akin to the beta 06 and Secret Rings for a comparison. Fundamentally, the story wouldn't change that much like the Tails and Cosmo romance, since that is the central theme of both the developments and the story. However, there will be some restructuring if the Metarex Saga was picked as a storyline for Sonic 06. For one, this is where we go into the different perspectives of the game, which is similar to SA2 and Heroes, instead of the individual stories in Sonic Adventure 1 and Sonic 06. Team Sonic would consist of Sonic, of course, Tails, and Knuckles. The next team story will be Team Dark, consisting of Shadow, Rouge, and Omega. Hypothetically, the last story will be the Chaotix with Vector, Espio, and surprisingly, Silver. More on that later. Aside from the exclusion of Chris, Team Sonic's story probably wouldn't be that different from the show. Key moments like Super Sonic finding Dark Oak in the beginning, the Japanese version of Yellow Zelkova's death, and Dark Sonic would still be left intact, although I think we get to play as Dark Sonic in the boss fight. I think what would essentially happen, and this goes for other stories as well, they would frame one Metarex general as the main villain of each story, with Dark Oak being the main villain of Team Sonic's story since he's the leader of the Metarex. Team Dark's story would be different from the show in that they had to go to space due to the Metarex attacking Gun HQ, and were tasked by the commander to find out more about the Metarex. Different from the show of Rouge being stowed on Eggman's ship and Shadow having amnesia. They really loved that plot point, didn't they? Also, Omega's here. We like Omega. The main villain of their storyline is Black Narcissus, which I believe he could function similar to Mephiles, where he tries to convince Shadow that humanity could betray him at one point, no matter what he does. Finally, our last story, Team Chaotix, with temporary member Silver. Okay, so in the show, the Chaotix were simply there to provide comic relief. However, if they were in the anniversary game, Sonic Team probably want to show that they are competent detectives while also testing their abilities. Pale Bailey could be the villain to showcase that, since to me, he was the most calculating commander of the Metarex. Since the Chaotix would be the most isolated from the other two teams and what's going on with the Metarex, Pale Bailey could try to obstruct the Chaotix and mislead them to come to false conclusions in outer space, which could frustrate them. If anything, the Chaotix would deal with the more mystery aspects of the story. Now, let's talk about Silver. I wanted to believe that Silver would still be part of this game because he is my favorite character, but I do have a theory that even if the Metarex Saga was chosen over the Flames of Disaster story, Silver would still be created for the anniversary game. Here's why. Well, usually for the anniversary games, there will be a new character to help sell copies. This goes back to Sonic Extreme in 1996 with Tiara for the 5th anniversary, Shadow and Rouge for the 10th anniversary in 2001, so Sonic Team will want a new cool character for the 15th anniversary, and that will be Silver and Cosmo. Also, Sonic Team are huge Dragon Ball fans and wanted to make their own version of Trunks, so Silver was inevitable. Anyways, maybe Silver's involvement in the story could be that in his timeline, the Metarex had won, and Earth is now a dead planet, and living on it is not ideal, especially with villains like Eggman Nega. I honestly see Eggman Nega being retconned to be the descendant of Eggman that early after what says otherwise so quickly, trying to conquer a world that is not worth it. Silver convinced him to find out the truth of how things went wrong in the past and time travel 200 years ago to find answers, which he will team up with the Chaotix and join on a mystery to help make a better future for the universe. I do think he will scuffle with Sonic and Shadow due to false accusations bestowed upon him by Pale Bayleaf, similar to what Mephiles did, and I feel like his art from the 06 we got about whether or not is it right to kill someone for the sake of others will be left intact, just replacing Blaze with the Chaotix to help him on his character journey. Also, since Pale Bayleaf could be framed as Silver and Chaotix's main adversary in their story, maybe they are the ones who get to experience Pale Bayleaf's war with planet Cascade's resistance. Yeah, it will be fundamentally different from what we got with Shadow and Molly in our timeline, but just food for thought when I think about it. All three stories do end with finding the respective Metarex commander on different planets, and then last story will be unlocked. It pretty much be the same as the last several episodes of the season, starting with Shadow trying to kill Cosmo with Sonic and Silver trying to stop him. The only other change is that due to the nature of them being detectives, the Chaotix are the ones who found Earthia's pre-recorded message about Cosmo race on planet Greengate instead of Amy and Rouge. Obviously, Silver will go super alongside Sonic and Shadow against Phantomova, which Sonic suggests Silver should do to help since it's likely that they didn't succeed without him in his timeline, similar to what he said in a similar situation in IDW's Metal Virus arc. And that's pretty much it for the fundamental changes I think Sonic Team could have come up with in the alternate timeline for the game. Cosmo dies, that's not changing, sorry Tails, and the story will end with the status quo starting up again for our present heroes as Silver returns to his time period to see a good future of his Earth where Eggman Nega is trying to attack again, causing Silver to go back to his normal routine and stop the scientists for the sake of the new beauty he helped achieve for the planet. That's it, the story of the alternate Sonic 06. It's time for me to wrap things up. So for gameplay, Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, Shadow, and Rouge will play similar to how they play in Sonic 06. Same thing goes for Omega and Silver. Vector and Espio will be similar to how they play in Heroes, but more expansion on their individual abilities. I can also see Sonic Team having a new gameplay style where you can play as each team's respective spaceships in space, a la Star Fox. I believe that the soundtrack we got for Sonic 06 in this timeline would definitely be the soundtrack for this hypothetical Metarex game with more songs for the Chaotix. I believe that soundtrack transcends alternate dimensions no matter what the 50th anniversary game is about. Well, that was my video on what Sonic 06 could have been. I get that this isn't what people were expecting when talking about what could have been with Sonic 06, but hey, I get to talk about the Metarex and how they could have been a story draft for the game. It's a fun theory that transformed into a fun what if, and I want to know what your thoughts on this theory are below. Sonic Team were going through politics with Sega at the time when making 06, so I don't know that going with the Metarex immediately would make things better for the game, but let's not end on a downer. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. If I have a nickel for anytime Son Shenmue, the voice of Goku, voices an alien bad guy in Sonic, I had two, which isn't a lot, but it's strange that it happened twice nearly back to back.